The harsh betrayal in a quiet, desolate field. An alien girl named Ryla struggled against the ropes that bound her wrists. The harsh wind cut through her thin clothes, and the barren landscape stretched endlessly before her. She could hear the distant hum of the harvester's blades drawing closer with every passing second. It was the sound of her doom. Ryla had once believed in the warmth of family. She had believed in the love and protection they promised. But now, all of it felt like a cruel lie. Her family had left her here, tied up and abandoned, to face the machines that would tear her apart. The very same family she had loved and trusted had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way. Her heart pounded in her chest as she fought against the ropes, but the knots were tight and her strength was fading. She had been left to die in this vast, unforgiving world. The blades of the harvester were now much closer, their sound almost deafening. It would only be a matter of time before they reached her. Why did they do this to me? Ryla thought, her mind racing. She could still remember the warmth of her mother's embrace, the smiles of her siblings, the laughter they once shared. It all seemed so distant now. She never imagined that one day they would turn on her like this. She had always been different. She had powers that no one else had, powers that her family feared. The strange abilities she possessed made her both special and dangerous in their eyes. It wasn't long before they realized she could no longer be controlled, and so they made their choice. They tied her up, left her in the field, and abandoned her to the cruel fate that awaited her. The harvester blades whined louder, and Ryla's heart sank. She could see the shadow of the machine looming in the distance. It was coming for her, and there was no escape. Tears stung her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wasn't ready to die. Not like this. As the sound grew louder, Ryla felt the cold steel of the machine's blades looming overhead. Her breath caught in her throat. There was no way out. She closed her eyes, waiting for the inevitable. But then, just as the blades were about to descend, she heard something. A distant shout. A voice. A cry for help? Ryla's eyes snapped open. Who would be out here? There was no one for miles, yet the voice called again, more clearly now. Hold on. In that moment, Ryla's heart skipped a beat. Could it be? Someone was actually coming for her. As she strained to listen, she heard the sound of footsteps crunching on the dry earth. They were getting closer. Her eyes scanned the horizon, desperate for any sign of life. And then, like a miracle, she saw a figure appear on the edge of the field. A man, a human man, his face determined and his movements swift. He was running toward her, his eyes locked on the harvester's blades, his focus unshaken by the danger. Ryla's mind raced. Who was this person? Why would anyone risk their life for her? She had been abandoned by everyone she trusted, and yet this stranger was charging toward her without hesitation. The man reached her just as the harvester blades were nearly upon her. Without a second thought, he drew a knife from his belt and began cutting through the ropes that held her. Ryla could hardly believe what was happening. She had been certain she was going to die here alone, but this stranger was saving her. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. Are you all right? The man asked urgently, looking into her eyes. His voice was rough, but there was something gentle about it too. He didn't seem scared of her, even though she knew she must look like a wild, untamed creature from another world. Ryla wanted to say something, to thank him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just nodded. She didn't understand why he had come to help her, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she felt a glimmer of hope. Could this be her chance to survive? To escape the fate her family had chosen for her? With the ropes finally cut, the man helped her to her feet. He steadied her as she stumbled, her legs weak from being tied for so long. She felt the warmth of his hand on her arm, and for a brief moment, it was like everything she had known had shifted. She wasn't alone anymore. Someone cared. Someone was here. Come with me, the man urged, his voice soft but firm. We need to get out of here before they find you. Ryla glanced back at the harvester, which had now stopped, its blades spinning slowly as though it too were waiting for something. But Ryla didn't care about the machine anymore. She looked at the man standing beside her. He wasn't scared. He wasn't running. And for the first time in a long while, Rila felt something she hadn't felt in years, safety. "Who are you?" she managed to whisper, her voice barely audible. The man gave a small smile, though it was tinged with sadness. "My name is Kyle, and right now I'm the only one who can help you." Rila didn't know if she could trust him completely, but one thing was clear. This stranger had just given her a chance at survival, and for that, she would never forget him. The wind began to pick up again, but this time, Rila felt ready to face whatever came next. For the first time, she wasn't facing it alone. A stranger's hand. The first night after being saved was the quietest Rila had ever experienced. The silence was unfamiliar and strange. The hum of the harvester's blades, once an ever-present reminder of her past, was now just a distant memory. Yet, it was not the peace she'd hoped for. Her mind raced with questions. Who was this man? Kale? Why had he risked his life to save hers? What did he expect from her in return? The uncertainty gnawed at her, even as she sat beside the fire he had built, the warmth of the flames casting dancing shadows across his face. Kale didn't seem to mind the silence. He sat with his back against the rough cabin wall, sharpening a knife with slow, measured movements. His focus was intense, but his eyes flickered occasionally toward her, as if he was waiting for something, waiting for her to speak. She wanted to thank him, ask him why he saved her, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she just watched. Him. Her mind tangled in confusion and gratitude. "Are you hungry?" Kyle asked, breaking the silence. His voice was low, but it was comforting in its calmness. Rila blinked, startled by the sound of his voice. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she'd last eaten. She nodded, unable to speak. She didn't trust herself to say the wrong thing, to reveal too much. She didn't know this man, but her instinct told her that he wasn't like the others who had betrayed her. Still, she couldn't shake the fear that her situation was far from over. Kale stood and moved toward a small table in the corner of the cabin. He pulled out some dried meat and a few vegetables. Without a word, he set it in front of her. She could tell by his actions that he wasn't just offering food out of kindness. It was a way for him to bridge the gap between them. But was it enough? As she ate, Rila couldn't help but wonder what had driven Kale to help her. He wasn't from a nearby settlement, she could tell. His clothes were rough and worn, his boots muddy from the long walk through the fields. He lived alone, and there was a quiet sadness about him, a weight in his eyes that spoke of loss. She could sense it, but it wasn't the kind of loss that came from betrayal. It was the kind of loss that only a lonely man could carry. Kale watched her eat, and she could feel his gaze on her, but she didn't meet his eyes. Her thoughts were still on the family who had abandoned her. They had called her a danger to their lives. They had feared her, used her, and when she became too much of a threat, they had discarded her without a second thought. Her own blood had condemned her, and now she was left to figure out how to survive. "Are you afraid?" Kyle's voice brought her back to the present, his question cutting through the quiet. Rila hesitated. Fear was something she had lived with every day since she had discovered her powers. Fear of her family, fear of her abilities, fear of being alone. But fear of Kale? She didn't know. His presence didn't feel threatening, but it was still new, still unknown. She didn't know what to expect from him. "A little," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "But not of you." Kale's gaze softened, and he nodded as though he understood. "I know what it's like to be afraid of the world." She tilted her head, her curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" Kyle leaned back against the wall, his eyes darkening slightly. "I used to be part of a larger community. I had a family, a life that seemed perfect. But then one day, everything changed. I lost them. All of them. Now I've learned to live with it. To survive." Rila felt a pang of sympathy, though she didn't fully understand. She had never had a family in the same way, not one that truly accepted her for who she was. But she understood loss. the ache of missing something, someone. What happened? Kyle paused before answering, his face shadowed by painful memories. I won't go into details, but people in my community were afraid of what I could do. I wasn't a monster, but they didn't see it that way. In the end, I was left alone, just like you. Rila could feel the weight of his words, the shared loneliness that connected them. For the first time, she felt something more than the fear and suspicion that had clouded her mind since her escape. She felt understood. Suddenly, a loud thud echoed from outside the cabin. Both Kyle and Rayla tensed, their bodies going still, as the sound of footsteps crunched against the earth. Someone was approaching. Stay here, Kyle said, his tone serious. He grabbed a rifle from the corner and moved quietly toward the door. Rila's heart skipped a beat. Was it her family? Had they come back to finish what they started? She had no way of knowing, but the dread in her chest told her this was not a visit from a friend. Kyle paused at the door, his back to her. I'll take care of it, he assured her, but Rila could hear the tension in his voice. Without another word, he stepped outside. Rila stayed in the dark cabin, every sense on high alert. She couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was coming. The footsteps grew louder, closer, and then silence. For a moment, it was as if the world itself was holding its breath. Then chaos erupted. Gunfire rang out from outside the cabin, followed by shouts and heavy footsteps. Rila's pulse quickened. She wanted to help, but what could she do? She was trapped in this unfamiliar world, her powers useless without the knowledge of how to control them. Her mind raced. Should she stay hidden, or should she try to escape while there was still a chance? The gunfire stopped abruptly. Rila listened, holding her breath, wondering what had happened. Had Cale been hurt? Had they caught him? She couldn't let that happen. She wouldn't let him die for her. But then the door creaked open, and Cale stepped back inside, his face grim but unharmed. They're gone, he said, his voice tight. But they'll be back. We can't stay here. Rila looked at him, her heart pounding. Who were they? Cale's eyes darkened. I don't know, but they know about you, and they're not going to stop until they have you. Rila's stomach twisted with fear. She had no idea who these people were, but one thing was certain. Her past was catching up with her, and now Cale was involved too. She wasn't safe. Not yet. Then what do we do? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear rising inside her. Kyle met her gaze, his expression hardening. We run. We fight back. The unlikely hero. The night air was thick with tension as Kyle and Rila prepared to leave. The distant sound of footsteps, now silent, lingered in Rila's ears like the echo of a threat. They had no time to waste. Whoever had come for her earlier was sure to return with reinforcements, and they would be even more dangerous next time. The cabin was no longer safe. Kyle moved quickly, securing their few belongings with quiet precision. Rila watched him, a knot of uncertainty twisting in her stomach. She wanted to ask more questions, wanted to know everything about the man who had saved her. But something told her this wasn't the time. There were bigger dangers to face, and the answers would come when they were far enough from this place. Where are we going? Rila finally asked, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost afraid of what he might say. Kyle paused, glancing back at her. The firelight caught his face, revealing the lines of exhaustion etched deep in his features. We're heading for the foothills. There's a cave there. It's isolated. We can lay low for a while. Is that where you go when you hide? She asked, her voice cautious but curious. Kyle's eyes hardened at the question. It's not hiding. It's survival. His tone carried a weight that Rila didn't dare question. She didn't need to. It was clear that Cale had lived a hard life, one shaped by choices no one should ever have to make. The two of them stepped outside, the chill of the night air biting at their skin. The world around them was eerily still, as if holding its breath. The only sound was the crunch of their footsteps on the dry ground beneath them. Rila shivered. The night felt colder than she'd ever known it to be. Perhaps it was the fear, or perhaps it was the weight of the unknown. Whatever it was, she felt vulnerable in a way she hadn't before. It wasn't just the looming threat of those who had chased her, but the deep uncertainty of what lay ahead. They walked in silence, the distance between them stretching with every step. Kyle's pace was steady and confident, but Rila's heart raced with each passing moment. She was no longer running from just the harvester or her family. She was running from a life she had once known, a life that had turned against her. And now, she was running toward an uncertain future with a man she didn't fully trust, but who had saved her life. As they neared the edge of the field, the outline of the mountains grew larger in the distance. The foothills were a long way off, but it felt like the only place that could offer her any form of safety. The land was rough, unwelcoming. Only those with the strength to survive could live there. The footsteps behind them were unmistakable. A flash of motion caught Cale's attention. He stopped suddenly, turning to look over his shoulder. Rila froze. The sound of distant voices carried on the wind, rising in volume. "Someone's coming," Cale muttered under his breath, reaching for his rifle. Rila's heart skipped a beat. She tried to peer into the darkness behind them, but all she saw were shadows. The figures that had chased them earlier were back, and they were closer this time. She could feel the air thickening, her senses sharpening, every nerve-ending alert. The past had caught up with her, and she didn't know if she was ready to face it. Cale turned to her, his eyes flashing with urgency. "We need to move. Now." Rila nodded, adrenaline flooding her veins. She ran after him, keeping her body low, her steps quick and quiet. They had to get out of sight before they were spotted. Cale led the way, his steps sure and purposeful, while Rila followed closely behind, trying to match his pace despite the growing panic clawing at her chest. The sound of their pursuers grew louder, the crunch of their boots on the dry earth, reverberating through the air. Rila's breath came in short, shallow gasps as they pushed on, each step bringing them closer to the foothills. Cale shot a glance over his shoulder. The figures were now close enough to be visible. They wore dark clothing, their faces obscured by masks, and they moved in a precise formation, clearly trained for this kind of hunt. "They won't give up," Cale said, his voice steady despite the danger. "We have to make it to the hills." But as they neared the edge of the field, Rila saw something that stopped her cold. A large shadow loomed ahead, something much bigger than they had expected. The unmistakable shape of an armored vehicle, its lights piercing the darkness, was parked just a few yards away. "We're trapped," Rila whispered, panic rising in her chest. Kyle cursed under his breath. The vehicle must have been waiting for them. He glanced around, calculating his next move. "Get to cover now." They dove into a small ditch nearby, the cold earth against their skin. Kyle pulled Rila close, his hand on her shoulder. His eyes were locked on the figures approaching them. They were almost at the vehicle now, closing in on the two of them with ruthless precision. Rila's heart hammered in her chest. There was no way out. The hills felt so far away, and the vehicle would block any chance of escape. They were trapped, and her mind raced to find a solution. Suddenly, Cale pulled her closer, his breath steady despite the chaos around them. "Listen to me, Rila. If we're going to survive this, you need to trust me. I need you to do exactly what I say, no questions. Do you understand?" Rila's eyes locked with his, the urgency in his gaze cutting through her fear. She nodded quickly, her body tense, ready to act. Cale's grip tightened on her arm. "On my mark, we move. Stay low, stay silent. We get to the hills." Rila swallowed hard, nodding again. The sound of footsteps grew louder as the figures moved past their hiding spot, not knowing they were so close. Every muscle in Rila's body screamed to run, but she held her ground, keeping her breathing steady. Cale's eyes narrowed. "Now," he whispered. In one swift motion, they sprang to their feet, moving silently toward the rocky outcrop that would hide them from view. Cale's experience was clear. He moved like a shadow, quick and silent, while Rila followed his lead, her heart pounding with every step. But the danger was far from over. They weren't alone in this world anymore, and as the distance between them and the armored vehicle grew, Rila realized that their survival depended not only on their ability to run, but on their ability to fight back. This wasn't just about escaping, it was about surviving. The night was just beginning and the real battle had yet to unfold. A hidden enemy. The silence that followed the daring escape was suffocating. Rila's breath came in sharp, uneven gasps as they crouched behind the jagged rocks, hidden from the view of the armored vehicle that still loomed on the outskirts of the field. Kale's gaze never wavered from the distant road, his rifle clutched tightly in his hands, his body tense with readiness. Rila couldn't stop shaking. Her mind spun with a whirlwind of thoughts, most of them fear. She'd spent her life trying to hide her powers to keep them from being discovered, but the world had turned on her. Her family, her very own blood, had discarded her like an object they no longer needed. And now strangers, masked figures armed with weapons and driving machines of death, were hunting her. The man beside her, Kale, had saved her life, but she didn't know what he was truly capable of. She had seen his quiet strength, his bravery, but she knew little else. His past was a mystery, his motives unclear. Was he really helping her out of kindness? Or was there more to him than he let on? Kyle's voice broke through her thoughts. "Stay low," he whispered, his words cutting through the stillness. His eyes flickered toward the hills in the distance. "We need to move, but we can't let them see us. They know we're out here." Rila nodded, barely able to focus. Her eyes darted around, searching for any movement in the dark, but all she could see were the shadows that stretched across the uneven terrain. The ground beneath them was hard and dry, a stark contrast to the moisture that was now thick in the air. The threat of discovery weighed heavily on her chest. "Who are they?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kale's eyes shifted to her, a flicker of something darker in his gaze. "I don't know, but they know exactly who you are. That's why they're hunting you. You're not just any alien. They want you for something. Something they think they can control." Rila's heart skipped a beat. She'd always known that her abilities made her dangerous to others, but this was different. These people weren't just after her because of her powers. They were after her for something more, something she didn't fully understand. "What do they want with me?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain calm. Kyle didn't answer immediately. Instead, he surveyed the area once more, ensuring they hadn't been spotted. "I think you already know," he said finally, his voice low and careful. "You're more than just an alien. You're something they've been searching for a long time." The words sent a chill down her spine. Rila had never fully understood the scope of her own powers. She had always been told she was special, that her abilities were unlike anything else. But the way Kale spoke about it, with such certainty, made her wonder if there was more to her past than she realized. Before she could ask any more questions, the distant sound of engines broke the silence. A vehicle, different from the armored one they had seen earlier, rumbled into the field, its headlights cutting through the darkness. It stopped at the far end, and several figures stepped out. "They're here," Kyle said urgently, his grip tightening on his rifle. "We don't have much time." Rila's pulse quickened as the figures approached. She could make out the shapes of men and women, their movements deliberate and controlled. They weren't the same as the ones who had chased her earlier, but they shared the same purpose, finding her. Kyle stood up slowly, pulling Rila to her feet. "We're not out of danger yet," he said, his voice firm. "I'll handle this. You stay hidden." Rila's mind raced. She didn't want to hide. She didn't want to be a passive observer in her own fight for survival. But Kale's eyes told her that this wasn't the time to argue. He was preparing to face them, whatever they were, and she could do nothing but trust him. As Kale moved ahead, positioning himself strategically behind the rocks, Rila crouched low, her heart hammering in her chest. She could hear the voices of the approaching figures now. Low murmurs exchanged between them as they spread out, searching for any signs of movement. "She's here somewhere," one of them said, a voice tinged with frustration. "We can't lose her." Again, Rila's breath caught in her throat. They were hunting her, relentlessly, with precision. She wasn't just a fugitive, she was their target, and they would stop at nothing to find her. Suddenly, Cale's voice rang out, cutting through the tense silence. "You won't find her," he called, his tone steady but laced with an underlying threat. The figures stopped, their heads swiveling toward Cale's position. Rila held her breath, her hands trembling as she waited for the confrontation to unfold. 1. Of the figures stepped forward, a tall man with cold eyes and a scar that ran down the side of his face. "You're a fool to stand against us," he said, his voice calm but dangerous. "We've been tracking her for weeks. You can't protect her." Kyle didn't flinch. He raised his rifle, the motion fluid and deliberate. "I'm not trying to protect her from you," he said. "I'm protecting her from what's coming." The scarred man smirked, but there was something calculating in his eyes. "You think you can stop us?" he asked. "You think you can stand in our way?" "I'm not alone," Cale replied, his voice growing colder. "And neither are you." Before Rila could process his words, another voice rang out from behind the figures. "Enough." The command was simple, but the power behind it sent a shock of fear through Rila's body. She had never heard such authority in a voice before, and it instantly made her skin crawl. A woman stepped forward from the shadows, her presence commanding and intense. She was tall, with sharp features and dark eyes that glimmered with a cold, calculating intelligence. She wore a dark uniform adorned with symbols that Rila didn't recognize, symbols that suggested power, something beyond just a soldier's insignia. "Who are you?" Cale demanded, his grip tightening on his rifle. He wasn't intimidated, but Rila could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This woman was different. The woman smiled, but it wasn't a smile that brought comfort. It was the smile of someone who knew they held all the cards. "I am someone you should fear," she said softly, "and you're about to learn exactly why." Rila felt her heart sink. The tension in the air was palpable, and the darkness that surrounded them seemed to press in closer. These people weren't just enemies, they were the kind of enemies that could bring the whole world to its knees. The woman took another step forward, her eyes locking onto Rila's. "You think you're running from us," she said, her voice a soft, threatening whisper, "but you're running straight into my hands, and once I have you, no one will save you." Cale's eyes flashed, his jaw tightening. "You'll never get her." The woman's smile grew wider, almost predatory. "We'll see about that." Rila's mind raced, her heart pounding in her chest. The stakes had just been raised. She wasn't just a pawn anymore. She was the key to something far more dangerous, and with each passing second it became clearer. Escaping these people wouldn't be enough. She had to fight back. But first she needed to survive, and survival meant facing a hidden enemy that she had never even imagined. Unraveling secrets. The air was thick with tension as Cale and Rila stood in the cold shadows of the foothills, hidden among jagged rocks and craggy outcrops. Behind them, the enemy was closing in. They had barely escaped the woman and her group, but Rila could feel their eyes on her, always watching, always waiting. There was no escape from them, no place where she could hide forever. They knew who she was, and that made her a target. Kyle, however, wasn't afraid. His expression was hard, determined, but beneath the surface Rila could sense something else, something buried deep within him. He wasn't just protecting her, he was running from something too, something in his past that he wasn't telling her. They had made it to a narrow passage between two large rock formations, a place where they could catch their breath, but Rila didn't feel safe. Not really. The danger was still out there, stalking them, and with each passing minute, the weight of her own secret seemed to crush her a little more. Cale turned to her, his dark eyes filled with unspoken words. He had been quiet for a long time, his mind clearly working through the next steps, but Rila couldn't hold it in any longer. "Why are they after me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Cale paused for a moment, his hand resting on the grip of his rifle. He was silent, as if deciding whether or not to share what he knew. But he had already shared so much. He couldn't keep the truth from her any longer. He had to tell her. You're more than just a fugitive, Rila. Kyle began, his voice low and guarded. You were never meant to be just another alien. They've been looking for you because of what you can do. What you've always been capable of. Rila's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? What can I do? Kale's gaze darkened and he stepped closer to her, lowering his voice even further. You're not just an alien with unusual abilities. You're something more. You've been designed, built for something. And those people, the ones chasing you, they've been tracking your family's bloodline for years. They know what you are. The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Designed? Built? Rila took a shaky step back, her mind spinning. She had always known she was different, had always felt like there was something inside her that didn't quite belong. But this was something else entirely. Designed for what? She asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and confusion. Kyle's eyes flashed, a storm of emotions in his gaze. Your family, they didn't just give birth to you, Rila. You were created with a purpose. They've been using you, shaping you for something far more dangerous than you can imagine. Rayla felt the ground shift beneath her feet. She had no answers, no understanding of who she truly was. All her life, she had been told she was special, that her powers made her unique. But now, it seemed like her whole existence was part of a cruel, manipulative plan, a plan she had never even been aware of. Kyle stepped back, his eyes clouded with guilt. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you sooner. I wanted to protect you from all this. But the moment they found you, everything changed. The weight of his words hit her harder than she expected. She wasn't just a victim in all of this. She was a key player in something larger, something dark and dangerous. Her life had been controlled, manipulated by the very people who had abandoned her. And now it was up to her to figure out how to fight back. They want me for something my family's been hiding? Rila asked, her mind struggling to process the depth of the revelation. Kyle nodded grimly. Yes, your powers, they aren't just abilities. They're tied to something ancient, something that could shift the balance of power in the entire galaxy. Rila stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was saying. Powers? An ancient force? The very idea was overwhelming. What do they want me to do? She asked, fear creeping into her voice. Kale clenched his jaw. They want to use you as a weapon, but it's not just about power. It's about control. They think that if they can harness your abilities, they can rewrite the course of history. The gravity of the situation was suffocating. Rila had never imagined that her existence could hold such weight. She was just a girl, struggling to survive in a world that had turned its back on her. But now her life had become a pawn in a dangerous game, and the stakes were higher than she ever could have imagined. I won't let them use me, she whispered, her voice fierce, a spark of defiance igniting inside her. Kale's eyes softened, and he placed a hand on her shoulder. I know, and you won't have to do it alone. But we can't do this the easy way. There's no escaping them. They'll keep coming, and next time, they won't stop until they have you. Rila nodded, her mind racing. She didn't know how to fight back against an enemy that knew her better than she knew herself. But Kale's words echoed in her mind. She wasn't alone anymore, and together, they might stand a chance. Before she could respond, the ground beneath them rumbled with the unmistakable sound of engines, loud, relentless, and closing in fast. The enemies were coming and they weren't far behind. We need to go now, Kale said, his voice urgent. He didn't wait for her response. He grabbed her arm and started moving toward the hills, his pace quick and steady. Rila followed, her legs feeling like they might give out, but her resolve hardened with each step. The distant rumble of their pursuers grew louder, and Rila felt her heart pound in her chest. They were closing in. But then, something unexpected happened. Rila's mind flashed back to the moment she had been tied up, moments before Kyle had found her. She had been desperate, struggling against the ropes, the harvester's blades looming dangerously close. But there had been a feeling, a pulse deep inside her, something she had never been able to explain. Now, as they moved forward through the hills, she felt it again. The energy, the power, swirling just beneath the surface. She focused, drawing, from that deep well inside her. Slowly, she began to sense the world around her, the vibrations in the earth, the shift of the wind, even the very air that seemed to buzz with anticipation. Cale turned to her, noticing the change. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. Rila's eyes shone with determination. I think I can control it." Before Cale could respond, Rila closed her eyes, focusing, harder, feeling the pulse within her grow stronger. The world around her seemed to bend and twist in her mind's eye, as if she could manipulate it with a thought. And just like that, the ground in front of them shifted. A small boulder rose from the earth, hovering inches above the rocky path. Kyle stared at her, wide-eyed. "What? How are you doing that?" Rila's heart raced, but this time it was with purpose. "I'm not sure," she admitted, her voice shaky. "But I think I'm starting to understand." The realization hit her like a wave. She wasn't just running from her past, she was about to rewrite it. But even as she spoke those words, she knew the hardest part was yet to come. They were being hunted. And now they would fight back, not just for survival but for a future that had been stolen from her long ago. The true battle had just begun, the final stand. The foothills were a battleground, the rocky outcrops towering above them like ancient sentinels guarding their final escape. Rila's senses were on fire as she concentrated, her newfound powers pulsing beneath her skin like a live wire. Kyle moved beside her, leading the way with confidence, but even he seemed to sense that the stakes had shifted. They were no longer just trying to escape. They were now preparing for a fight that would change everything. Rila had begun to understand the depths of her abilities, her mind and body attuned to something ancient and powerful. She could feel the earth beneath her feet, the way it hummed with energy like it was waiting for her to command it. The realization both terrified and exhilarated her. She wasn't just a pawn in someone else's game anymore. She had the power to change the rules, but power came with a cost. Every time she reached for it, she felt the strain in her body, the toll it took. The energy was vast, but it was also dangerous, unpredictable. She had to learn how to control it before it consumed her. "Stay close," Cale whispered, his voice urgent but calm. "We're almost there." The path ahead was narrow, winding through jagged cliffs that seemed to close in on them with every step. The moonlight barely filtered through the dark clouds overhead, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. Despite the danger, there was something strangely peaceful about the hills, like they were offering sanctuary, a place where the world could be left behind. But that peace was fleeting. The unmistakable sound of engines reached their ears again, distant at first, then growing louder with each passing second. The enemy was closing in fast, and they had no time to waste. Rila felt her heart quicken. She could sense them, feel them approaching, their heavy boots shaking the ground. They were relentless. They wouldn't stop until they had her. "They're too close," Cale muttered, his eyes scanning the horizon. "We don't have much time." Rila could see the glow of headlights in the distance, casting long shadows that stretched across the landscape. The armored vehicles were almost there, their engines roaring like the growl of a predator stalking its prey. It was only a matter of moments before they reached the base of the hills. Cale turned to Rila, his face hard with resolve. "We need to make a stand here. This is our last chance." Rila's chest tightened as she nodded, her mind racing. There was no running now, no escaping. The enemy had found them, and this was the moment where everything would either fall apart or fall into place. "Are you ready?" Kyle asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Rila met his gaze, her heart thudding in her chest. She wasn't ready, not in the way she had hoped. But she knew there was no other choice. She could feel the power within her, a storm waiting to be unleashed. She had to control it, she had to make it work. "I'm ready," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Cale nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "Then we fight." They moved to a higher ledge, a vantage point where they could see the enemy approaching. Rila felt the cold wind on her face, the chill of fear mingling with the anticipation that was building inside her. She was about to face something more than just a physical battle. This was a war for her very identity, a battle for control over her future, her power, and her very life. The headlights of the armored vehicles were now just beyond the ridge, and Rila could see the figures of the soldiers moving into position. They were here. They had come for her. Cale crouched beside her, his rifle ready. "Don't use your powers unless you have to," he said softly. "They're watching for anything out of the ordinary." Rila nodded. She understood. Every move they made would be scrutinized, and if she gave away too much, they would use it against her. She had to stay focused. She had to control the storm inside her. The enemy's footsteps grew louder as they approached the ledge. Cale's hand rested lightly on Rila's shoulder. "Stay low. Wait for my signal." The tension was unbearable. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. Rila could feel the earth beneath her, and in that moment, it was as if she could sense everything around her. The soldiers, the vehicles, the ground itself. Everything hummed with energy, vibrating in time with her pulse. Then, without warning, the first soldier appeared, his silhouette outlined against the dim light. He was close. Too close. Kyle didn't hesitate. He rose from his crouch, firing a single shot that echoed through the hills. The soldier crumpled to the ground, but his comrades didn't flinch. They were trained for this. "Move!" Kyle shouted, pulling Rila to her feet as the remaining soldiers advanced, taking cover behind rocks and boulders. The battle had begun. Rila's heart pounded as she followed Kale's lead, scrambling to find her own cover. She could hear the sounds of gunfire and shouting, the chaos swirling around her like a storm. But she wasn't just an observer this time. She wasn't just running. She was part of the fight. Her mind sharpened and she reached deep inside, calling on the power that had been growing within her. She could feel it now, raw and untamed, like a fire waiting to be ignited. She stretched out her hand, focusing on the rock in front of her. The earth responded. With a sudden motion, the rock lifted from the ground, rising into the air as if it were weightless. Rila's eyes widened in surprise. It was the first time she had been able to do something like this. The power surged through her, uncontrolled and wild. The soldiers nearby turned, their eyes widening in shock as the rock hurtled toward them, crashing into one of their barricades. The blast of sound was deafening, and the soldiers scrambled, trying to regroup. "Good work," Kyle shouted, but there was no time to celebrate. More soldiers were closing in, and they weren't backing down. Rila's heart raced. She could feel the power within her, but it was becoming harder to control. It was like trying to hold back a flood with her bare hands. "Kyle, they're too strong," Rila said, panic creeping into her voice. The enemy wasn't just relentless. They were organized, methodical, and powerful, and they had no intention of letting her escape. Cale glanced at her, his face grim but focused. "We need to take them down before they bring in reinforcements." He moved forward, his rifle raised, and Rila followed, her mind scrambling to keep the energy under control. She had to stay calm. She had to stay focused. The enemy's leader, an imposing figure in dark armor, appeared in the distance, walking toward them with purpose. His eyes locked onto Rila, and she could see the malice in his gaze. "It's time," Kyle said, his voice low. "Hold your ground." Rila steeled herself, her hands shaking with the raw power surging through her veins. This was it, the moment when everything changed, the final stand. As the leader drew closer, Rila felt the air around her crackle with energy. She was ready to fight, ready to end the chase once and for all. With a roar, she thrust her hands forward, releasing the power she had been holding back. The ground beneath the enemy leader cracked open, a massive fissure forming in the earth. Rocks, debris, and dust flew through the air as the ground itself seemed to tear apart. The leader staggered back, his eyes wide with disbelief. Rila's powers had never been unleashed like this before. She was no longer just a weapon. She was the force that could break the world apart. Kale turned to her, his face a mixture of awe and fear. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. But Rila wasn't done. Not yet. She could feel the storm inside her building again, and this time, she would let it roar. The enemy had underestimated her. The final battle had only just begun. A new beginning. The battlefield was still. The echoes of gunfire had faded, replaced by the unsettling silence of a world on the edge of collapse. The dust from the explosion still hung in the air, swirling in the moonlight like remnants of a war that should never have been fought. Rila's breath was shallow, her hands trembling as the weight of what she had just done settled heavily on her. She had unleashed everything, her powers, her fears, her deepest, most desperate emotions, and in doing so she had shattered the very ground beneath them. The enemy was retreating, scattered and broken, but Rila couldn't bring herself to feel the triumph she had expected. There was no victory in violence, no peace in destruction, only the hollow realization that there would always be another enemy. Another battle. Kale stood beside her, his expression unreadable as he scanned the horizon. His rifle was lowered, his stance weary but unyielding. He had fought beside her, protected her, and helped her discover the depths of her abilities. But now, it felt like they were standing on the edge of something darker. "You did it," Kale said, his voice low, almost reverent. Rila didn't respond immediately. She was still feeling the aftershocks of the power she had called upon. It had come so easily, so overwhelmingly. She could have destroyed everything, everyone. She could have torn the world apart, and yet, she hadn't. But how long could she hold back the storm inside her? How much longer could she pretend she was in control? "I'm not sure I can do this anymore," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I can't be the weapon they made me to be. I can't be a tool for destruction." Kale turned to her, his face softening as he took a step closer. "You're not a weapon, Rila. You're something much more powerful, and you don't have to fight alone anymore." Rila looked at him, her heart heavy with the weight of his words. She had never allowed herself to believe that she could be more than what her family had tried to make her. But Kale saw something in her that she couldn't see herself, and in that moment Rila realized that she had a choice to define her own destiny. Suddenly, a voice cut through the stillness. "You're not alone, Rila." She froze. The voice was familiar, but it was one she hadn't heard in so long. It was the voice of someone she had left behind, someone she thought she had lost forever. From the shadows emerged a figure, tall and imposing, with a presence that radiated power. Rila's heart skipped a beat as she recognized him, the leader of her family, her father. His face was hard as if carved from stone, but there was something different about him. His eyes no longer held the same coldness she remembered. There was something softer in them now, something almost human. "You came for me?" Rila asked, her voice barely a whisper, as if she were afraid this was just another cruel trick. Her father nodded, his gaze unwavering. "I came to make things right, to make amends for the mistakes I've made." Rila's mind raced. This was the man who had abandoned her, the man who had used her, manipulated her, and then discarded her like she was nothing. How could he be standing here now, claiming to want redemption? "You think you can just show up after all this time and expect me to forgive you?" Rila's voice shook with anger. "You abandoned me, left me to die. You don't get to fix things with a few words." Her father's expression faltered for a moment, but then he stepped forward, his voice steady. "I never wanted to hurt you, Rila, but I didn't understand what you were, what you could become. I let fear cloud my judgment." Rila's chest tightened, the anger inside her fighting with the flickering remnants of the love she had once felt for him. It had been so long since she had even considered the possibility that he could care about her. But now, in front of her, he was asking for something she didn't know if she could give him. You don't get to tell me that you care, Rila said, her voice cold, the pain of years of abandonment too raw to ignore. You don't get to undo what you've done. Her father's eyes softened, and for the first time in Rila's life she saw something that resembled regret. I can't undo the past, Rila, but I can help you change the future. You don't have to keep running. You don't have to keep fighting alone. Rila turned away from him, her heart a storm of conflicting emotions. She didn't know what to believe anymore. All her life she had been told that her powers were a curse, a thing to be feared. But Kale had shown her that they could be something more. He had taught her that she didn't have to be defined by her past. She could choose her own path. Rila, Kale said gently, stepping toward her. We've come this far together. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Rila looked between Kale and her father, the weight of her decisions pressing down on her. The world around her seemed to fade, leaving only the two men who had shaped her destiny. Her father, the one who had betrayed her, but now offered a chance for redemption. And Kale, the stranger who had become her protector, her ally, and her strength. The wind began to pick up, swirling around them as Rila took a deep breath. The storm inside her was still there, but it wasn't as overwhelming as it had been before. She could feel the power, but now she had a sense of control. She wasn't just a weapon anymore. She was something more, a force that could change the world, if only she could learn to harness it. Let's finish this, Rila said, her voice steady now, filled with resolve. She turned toward her father, her eyes meeting his. But I'm doing this on my terms. Her father nodded, a small but genuine smile crossing his lips. On your terms, Rila. I'll follow your lead. Kyle placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze full of pride. We're with you. Every step of the way. Rila's heart swelled, with something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. The road ahead was uncertain, the danger still very real. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of the future. She wasn't running from her past anymore. She was ready to face whatever came next, and she knew she wouldn't have to face it alone. The three of them stood together, ready to confront the world that had tried to tear them apart. Rila's powers, once a curse, were now her strength. She had discovered the truth about who she was, and she wasn't going to let anyone, family, enemy, or fate dictate her destiny. And as they set out toward the horizon, Rila knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. The battle for her future had only just begun. Tools,